Life in the pandemic for many college students has flipped their world upside down. A new study during the fall semester and the coronavirus pandemic found that stress, anxiety, and loneliness has been pervasive for students.
And so all of this time of people saying you should get out there, you should be more social, you should try to meet people, you should go to clubs, all of that was completely cut off. And now everyone was saying, stay in your house, stay in your dorm, don't talk to people unless it's over, video chat, and just don't go to the grocery store unless you absolutely have to, and wear a mask and cover up and stay away from people. And it just felt really, really isolating.
We know social development for young people is crucial, yet social distancing has pulled people apart when we actually need each other the most.
There was all of a sudden, this university that was so vibrant and full of life and full of people became like a ghost town in 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, reaching out to friends wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't positive anymore. It was dangerous. It was advised against.
For a young person, safety and trust in people and in the world has been shattered by COVID-19.
Not only scary to just go out in the world, but scary to even trust anybody. And there was this very I can't trust anybody. I can't interact with anybody.
For a college student, looking at the economy and job market drop has been scary and demoralizing.
Jobs just dropping like flies. People were just losing their jobs, not being able to pay their rent, not being able to pay money, because I was basically entering the job market when it was completely bare. And my boyfriend's in law school. He's like, no firms are hiring right now. Everyone is desperate for jobs, and they're already firing people, let alone hiring new people.
In a time where child suicide is on the rise, sometimes adults don't know how to reach out. This young psychology student shares her practical advice from her perspective.
Having somebody truly care about you and say, I love you, I care about you. I'm not asking how you are because I'm trying to be nosy about your life. I genuinely want to know how you're doing. This is rough. It's rough for me too.
Aloha mamas, and welcome to the CoronaMama Zoom Room. This show is brought to you by the Maui Mama magazine. And we are here for you, the Maui Mama, to help you to connect and express and share all those things that are on our minds during this pandemic time. Our motto is #share aloha, not corona. I'm Angeline Chu Longshore, and today we're talking about what it's like for young people during this pandemic. We don't often get to hear from young people, so we are super lucky that last week I interviewed the Marks family in our Actions of Aloha segment, and so we get to hear from Skylar Marks, the daughter who is in college. And our Actions of Aloha segment this week recognizes the Hawaii Department of Health and Maui County for becoming the first state to roll out the AlohaSafe Alert App. This app will alert you if you've been exposed to COVID-19. And the great thing about it is that it's totally voluntary, private, and completely free. Love that. Okay, back to our main segment. Well, since August, we have seen studies, or I've seen studies that have been showing anxiety, stress, depression on the rise amongst young people. And we all are continuing to feel stress, anxiety, and depression, all of us, including young people. So mamas, I thought that it would be so helpful for us to just get some insight into what it's like, so that if you have a young adult or a teen in your life, that maybe that young person is not so verbal, and for us to know what it's like, maybe we can help our kids better. So let's bring Skylar Marks into the Zoom room. Aloha, Skylar. Welcome to the CoronaMama Zoom room again.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So for the audience who maybe didn't watch last week, which you should watch last week if you didn't, but introduce yourself to us.
Okay, so I'm Skylar. Last week, my whole family was interviewed about the Hawaii Food Project that my dad started to help out some families who may be going through some financial hardships during the pandemic, and it gives out free groceries. So go check that out if you know anybody who might benefit from that. And I am 24 years old. I am a college student. I'm almost graduated, and I think I'm on the show just to kind of give maybe a different perspective from a different generation.
We don't often hear from young adults or young people about how they're feeling in this time during the pandemic. And I recently was reading about how a lot of young people are going through depression, anxiety, even suicide. And we don't need to get too heavy, but it's just that I think for the parents that are watching, a lot of you moms out there, you may have kids, even if they're not young adults, even younger kids, that we don't always know what's going on in our children's minds and what their perspective is, how they see things. And we sometimes don't stand back to really observe what's going on because we just think that we already know. But now that we're in this different time, a lot of times kids are pretty silent and they're very internal about what's going on with them. So that's why I wanted to have you on, Skylar, because having your insight can help us to navigate how we can interact and talk with our kids to really, really find out, to really beyond the surface level. So, there's a lot of things that I want to know. And I guess the first thing is, do you think that there is a need for parents to look beyond the surface of day to day of how kids are just getting by and thinking that maybe they're just okay? Do you think kids actually are having a lot of anxiety, depression, issues that they're not telling their parents about?
Yeah, I think just in general from who I've spoken to and who I've interacted with in my age group and younger and older a little bit, I think that there is a extreme amount of anxiety that is much higher than it seems that it was in previous generations, and depression and loneliness. Even though there's so much connection with technology and social media, there's also a lot of isolation. And when you mentioned before that kids don't really express what they're feeling, you're very spot on, I think, about that. If they do express it, a lot of the time it's over social media, or it's often like an anonymous account. So it's more to kind of express it for their own self, but it doesn't actually help them get any better because they're not reaching out for help. They're just kind of pushing it somewhere else. And of course, it's very important and helpful psychologically to express yourself in any way that you see fit or whatever way you can. It's not easy to go and talk to somebody, especially that you really care about or know well, because it's very vulnerable. But I think that it definitely opens up a lot more possibilities to improve or to feel like there's just a weight lifted off your shoulder. Typing something and putting it on Twitter or Instagram is going to feel super different than going and talking to your mom or dad and having them look at you and say, I'm so sorry, what you're going through is so hard and I empathize with you, or I can never understand, but I'm here for you anyway.
To Skylar's point, in August 2020, a study of young adults 18 to 30 years old reported high levels of loneliness during the pandemic, feeling cut off from social circles, which caused anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress symptoms. The study found that it was the inability to tolerate distress and bounce back with emotional resilience that caused the depression and anxiety for the young people. And mamas, it's very important to note that the study found that reassurance from a family member felt more meaningful than comfort from their friends. And also being comforted by a parent felt more stable and reassuring, along with resources a parent could provide.
And I think a big part of why kids and young people tend to maybe shy away from reaching out are maybe judgment. I think they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be necessarily told that their feelings are not valid. A lot of times people are told that it's very common and what they're going through, everybody feels that way, which is one of the most frustrating things, because even if that's true, it's not helpful. It just makes you feel it makes you feel completely dismissed. And I think that there is a lot of dismissiveness sometimes with older generations of like, oh, well, I grew up and I was fine and you can make it through. But the world is really different than it used to be. And I'm not saying that it's harder in every sense. I think there are definitely some ways that the world is easier. I mean, you can go on an app and order your groceries and it comes right to your door. That didn't used to be a thing. You used to have to get in the car and drive there.
Tell me how it is different.
Yeah. So I think the major ways that the world is different is that, one, I think it's way more competitive when it comes to jobs and careers. When you're talking about my age group in your 20s, or college students or college grads, or even grad students or master's students, there is so much more competition about how everybody's up for the same jobs. There's way higher expectations of what you're supposed to know. Even when you look at sports, the amount of things that you have to know as a gymnast now used to be Olympian level back in the 80s.
Totally.
You know, and my brother's a gymnast. I'm sure he can tell you a little bit about that. But when you look at everything, the large scheme of things, technology, IT, engineering, medicine, everything is just, more knowledge is available. The internet kind of gives you no excuse to not know things or not to pick up things very quickly or to figure things out on your own. And I think that because of that, there's a lot of pressure on young people to be independent and make everything work and make the right choice. And there's also something that I learned a lot about when I was studying a lot of psychology, because that was a big part of what my study has been in college. And there's a lot of decision fatigue going on, because when you have too many choices, they actually notice that depression rates skyrocket, because people are so not only afraid of not succeeding in the choice that they make, but they're afraid of making the wrong choice. And back in the day, like back when my grandma was young, women went to college and they could either be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. That was it. Now, females can be anything that they want to be, and anybody can be anything that they want to be. And there is a lot of pressure there to figure it out and make it work. And I mean, not that this is a bad question. I think it's an important question, but I used to get asked, and I still get asked all the time, when people find out that I'm in college, or that I'm not in high school, because I'm quite young. A lot of times people think I'm quite young. But when they figure out that I'm a young adult, the first thing they ask me is, what are you studying and what are you going to do after college? What's your job plan? What's your career plan? And I don't know. There is a lot of pressure there. And although I know that everybody and every generation's had their own pressures, that I feel like in some ways they are kind of heightened. And there's everybody's eyes on you. And even with social media, that's the case.
So let's get into the pandemic and how this is affecting yourself and people you know, because I think it's really heightened a lot of feelings that were already there. You know, we already had anxiety and depression amongst young people that is on the upward trend, actually. But in your opinion and what you're seeing amongst you and your friends, what can you tell us about what's going on for you that we may not be seeing?
I think for college students specifically, because as I mentioned in the previous episode, I was still in university when the whole thing hit, and I think it was around like February or March when it started getting really bad. I was living in the dorms with everybody else, and I luckily had my own bathroom and even my own kitchen, because I was in kind of an apartment style dorm. But I cannot even imagine how much more stressful it would have been sharing common areas. But even then, even though my parents were only an island away, it felt really far all of a sudden, because you couldn't get on planes, and if you did, it was really scary and risky, and you just felt so isolated from not only your family and everything that you knew, but also all your peers. And all of a sudden, reaching out to friends wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't positive anymore. It was dangerous. It was advised against. And so all of this time of people saying you should get out there, you should be more social, you should try to meet people, you should go to clubs, all of that was completely cut off. And now everyone was saying, stay in your house, stay in your dorm, don't talk to people unless it's over, video chat, and just don't go to the grocery store unless you absolutely have to, and wear a mask and cover up and stay away from people. And it just felt really, really isolating. And as I also mentioned in the previous episode, I was kind of a unique student because I actually was already taking online classes when the pandemic hit. So there wasn't as much of a shift for me and getting used to that. But I have some friends who hadn't been and who didn't particularly learn well online. And it was such a culture shock for them all of a sudden to be so responsible for every task that they had to, that they had to kind of mandate for themselves, and not having a teacher to interact with and bounce ideas off of. And discussions just aren't quite the same over Zoom. A lot of people aren't paying attention, and you just kind of zone out, and you can be watching YouTube in the back of it or whatever it is, and you're just not really present. And I know a lot of people who just, their anxiety skyrocketed, especially some people who were doing kind of higher level studying. I mean, I have 2 cousins who are in med school, and they were like, I have clinicals that I was supposed to start. Now everything's online. I'm doing all these labs online. All this stuff, especially when it comes to things like medicine, that is supposed to be super hands-on, it's just cut off from the world. So I think that there was a lot of isolation, and there was a lot of fear. People hadn't really, I mean, nobody's ever been through anything like this. It's the first time in history that there's been this global of a virus or any sort of disaster that is affecting absolutely every country and every person. But I think that there was also this fear of when it was going to be over, what was going to happen next. Jobs just dropping like flies. People were just losing their jobs, not being able to pay their rent, not being able to pay money, or make money. And especially as a college student who's very close to graduation, that was terrifying to me, because I was basically entering the job market when it was completely bare and there was nothing. And the best thing that I could do now, all of a sudden, with a college degree, was work in a grocery store, because that's all that was hiring. And I mean, my boyfriend's in law school. He's like, no firms are hiring right now. There's going to be 70 or 100 law students each year that are flowing out. Everyone is desperate for jobs, and they're already firing people, let alone hiring new people. All the internships were completely canceled, which are necessary to graduate for a lot of programs. So, all these people who are supposed to go and work with judges or do clerkships, gone, nothing. And they were like, how am I supposed to get these hours? How am I supposed to get the experience to put on my resume to get jobs? I'm $100,000 in debt. For my generation, I noticed kind of these polar views of intense terror of future health. All these people, young people, oftentimes feel completely invincible. They've never had to worry about their health so seriously before. And then on the polar opposite end, people are like, I'm young, I'm fine, I'm healthy, I don't have to worry about it. And that's really scary too, because this is a situation where it's not just caring about yourself. Like if there's a thunderstorm going on, or some hurricane, and you want to be an idiot and go take a walk when they're advising you not to, and you get hit by a tree that's flown out of the ground, that's on you. That affects you and your family. But with the virus, you go out, you don't do something smart, you come back, you can spread it to hundreds of other people. So it's a lot more, not only scary to just go out in the world, but scary to even trust anybody. And there was this very I can't trust anybody. I can't interact with anybody. And I remember I used to take walks around the campus just to kind of clear my head. And the second you saw somebody coming within 50 feet of you, you'd cross the street. There was just this, people didn't want to meet your eyes. Even smiling at someone is impossible because you're wearing a mask. So you can't read expression and emotion the same way. It was very strange. And another thing that I mentioned before was that a lot of students left the dorms. There was all of a sudden this university that was so vibrant and full of life and full of people became like a ghost town in 2 weeks. Hundreds of, thousands of students moved out. And by the end of the semester, I think that there was 1/5 of the students even left on campus, and a large amount of those were international students who literally could not get into their home country, and they were stuck there, or students like me who were immunocompromised and were scared to leave on flights, or other circumstances where, but, and then the university was hemorrhaging money because they were giving refunds out to everybody who were leaving the dorms early. And so it was this whole situation. And I think just this rapid spontaneity and not knowing what the future holds and not being able to make plans. I know so many people who their life revolves around plans, and it just gives them so much relief to just have a plan. You can't have plans right now. It's completely just a free for all, and you don't even know what's going to happen next week, and all of a sudden cases spike again and everything just goes on lockdown. It was really scary. And we started, especially in Hawaii, because we were kind of the last end of the US to kind of start really dealing with this. We were watching California and all these places, and New York shut down and Italy shut down, and going, oh my God, what's going to happen? What are the rules going to be? How am I going to get food? Are the cafeterias still going to be open? What are the rules going to be about that? And everybody, it was really hard as a college student. And I also know that in Hawaii, it was a unique situation, because even to go home, if you were a local Hawaii resident, if your parents were on a different island, you were still stuck. Whereas on the mainland, you could drive home. And most of my friends on the mainland drove home and stayed with their families and just left and quarantined with them. But so many students in Hawaii were completely alone, completely isolated, without roommates. Or sometimes their roommates were going out and doing stupid things and coming back and getting them sick, or they were having to worry about that. And it was really, really a strange, one of a kind situation that I would never repeat. But it was rough, and I can see why anxiety skyrocketed, and I see why people felt so lonely and so alone and so scared.
You had mentioned that feeling of isolation, and then also on top of that, the feeling like of avoiding people and the complexity of it all socially. And at this time in your life, in a young person's life, that development of yourself by interacting with people is so important. It feeds you, it nourishes you, it makes you who you are, and it also tempers that well-being emotionally.
I think there are so many people, the majority of people, that are so filled up by others, that I think that it kind of will normalize out, and hopefully kind of the fear won't last too long. I'm definitely on like the more introverted side, like I said, so I'm going to take advantage of all of these, Zoom, and maybe go to grad school one day in a way that I couldn't before because of all this technology offered. Like, for example, my friend on the mainland, she is living alone right now, and she's getting ready to go to school in New York, actually, which is a really scary place to be right now. But she's doing her master's degree there, and she's a little isolated right now. She left Thanksgiving from seeing her family, and so we decided that each night of the week, as long as we were both free, we would start a Netflix show together and watch on this extension called Teleparty, where you watch it's synced up, and then we're on the phone with headphones so we can talk during the show and kind of interact. And it really does feel like we're watching it together, because I know that every second I'm watching, she's watching simultaneously, and it does feel really like a connection. And same with FaceTime and Skype and Zoom and all these things. When you're seeing somebody's face in real time, it really does feel genuinely like an actual connection. I think when you start going into social media and simply just texting or messaging without hearing a voice or seeing a face, it becomes a lot more anonymous, and it also becomes a lot more likely for fake information to be spread, for people to pretend like there's someone that they're not, and that's a whole nother issue. And I think that kind of just knowing that on some level of like, there is a small percentage, or even sometimes a large percentage, that the person that I'm talking to is not who they say they are at all. It changes it. Whereas when you're seeing their face and you're talking to them, it feels a lot more real. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, we were talking earlier about some unfortunate situations where young people, even as young as, I think we were talking 8 years old, took their life. And I know that's a really serious, heavy thing. And maybe it's not extremely common, but if you were to say, as a young person, if you had advice for parents, what would that be? And I know your parents are very much there for you,
yeah,
and so you don't feel like there's anything necessarily that your parents might need to change, but just as far as you being a young person and being really an observant, insightful person, um, what would you say would be helpful for those young people who maybe are on the brink of, not just suicide, but just on the brink of feeling really lonely and being very inward and not showing that really, and, maybe doing that thing where they're, putting it out on social media, but not expressing it to people they know. Do you have any thoughts about that, of what parents could do?
Yeah. Um, I think I think it's not just necessarily parents, but I think it especially applies in that situation. I think one of the most helpful things, especially for certain types of people, is to just listen, to just without a lot of judgment. Sometimes people want advice. Sometimes people don't want advice. That's kind of an individual, you have to kind of just judge or kind of suss out the situation. But having somebody truly care about you and say, I love you, I care about you. I'm not asking how you are because I'm trying to be nosy about your life. I genuinely want to know how you're doing. This is rough. It's rough for me too. Letting your kids know that you're not perfect, that you feel things too, that you don't always have to be this brute, strong force, that you can be vulnerable with your kids and say, look, this is really rough. I felt really low before. I've gotten through it, but sometimes you need to ask for help and sometimes you need to reach out. I think that vulnerability makes other people a lot more willing to put their walls down. Whereas if you're the type of parent, or not you specifically, but if people are the type of parent who are kind of under the assumption that parents should be seen as pure examples, they can do no wrong, they should never apologize for mistakes or acknowledge mistakes because parents aren't supposed to make mistakes, and then it makes them weak, and then the kids won't trust them, or the kids will take advantage of them, or whatever it is. I think that's completely false. I think that the more human you are and the more you show your kids that you have feelings, you have emotions, you make mistakes, and apologizing for when you do make mistakes. If you handle something wrong, or if a kid's feelings are hurt and they seem dejected, or they even say to you, hey, that wasn't cool, I didn't like how you did that. Maybe even if they say it in a really mean way, because kids often don't know how to express themselves correctly. If you say, you know what, you're right, I made a mistake and I'm really sorry and I want to make it right. What's a way I can do it better next time? What would make you feel more heard? What would make you feel more respected? And the more respect kids feel like they're getting, the more they're going to be willing to listen when a parent really puts their foot down and says, look, I know that you cannot see this from my perspective right now, but you just need to trust me. But regarding kids who are feeling super low, super depressed, super isolated, I think just if your kid likes hugs, give them a hug. I know some kids don't like physical affection. I think that's kind of on the rarer side, but I know that there are some kids who genuinely, especially from parents, just really don't want to be touched, especially like teenage boys who are just like, leave me alone. But I think another thing that's really important is there's a really amazing book about the love languages, the 5 love languages. Have you read that book? I
Mm-hmm.
think that is pretty key to any relationship, whether it be a friend, a partner, a child, knowing what makes your kid feel really loved. Because if you're trying to kind of go at it at the wrong direction, like let's say your kid is not very physically affectionate, but praise and compliments make them light up. If you're constantly trying to hug that kid, but you never, and all you do is say, oh, good job, but you never really give them a really thoughtful, encouraging compliment, they're not going to feel connected the
Mm-hmm.
same way that it was if you spoke to them on their level at their language. And the language that you give can be different than you receive. I know a lot of people who, like, for example, they love giving gifts. They don't love receiving gifts. They like acts of service or quality time, or getting a hug or a kiss or whatever it is. And so I think it's really important to not only know what love language you like to give, but also receive, and also what is going to make your kid feel the most loved and the most understood. Feeling heard and encouraged to explore things that they're passionate about, even if it seems so pointless to the parents. Like my brother was really into Minecraft, and he would build these elaborate things. And yeah, it's a video game. Yeah, it's technically kind of a waste of time, but it also takes a lot of engineering and sussing things out and calculations to do some of the stuff that he was doing. And even though I would rather pull my teeth out than play Minecraft, just sitting there and listening to my brother talk about it, or watching a YouTube video that he liked of a YouTuber, even though I thought it was kind of dumb, though, even though my brother, he tends to have pretty good choice in YouTubers. But I'm just giving an example of, maybe a parent is watching a kid's YouTube video and they're just thinking, this is so stupid. But just acting interested, like what you did was sit down with your kids and watch them play video games and ask about what they're doing and seem interested, or offer to play a game. It means so much to young people to feel like the parents are willing to kind of get to their level, go into their interests, and just be a little selfless, even though it might not be the most interesting thing to them, because that is a great way to start if your kid is just like walls up. Because if you enter their world, they're going to kind of start to meet you halfway. Whereas if you just always expect to just, after ignoring your kid and not being interested in anything that they are doing or are interested in, going into their room and wanting to talk with them and connect with them, there's probably going to be a very big disconnect.
What I found with my kids, and I do this all the time, is especially in the pandemic, I would let them see the anxiety that I was having, in the sense of saying, I'm not sure why I'm feeling like this, but I'm feeling like this. Are you feeling like this too? I know we're in this really weird world, and just letting them in. And then when I figured out that I was actually feeling grief because I was grieving the life that we had before, then I said, hey, you know what? I just realized that I've been anxious because I've actually been in grief. And here's why. And they were like, oh, and it's not like I expected them to admit that they were in grief or admit that they had anxiety or anything like that necessarily. But I think that it helps them to see, like, normalize, if they're feeling down, then they'll say, I'm not weird. It's not something to be ashamed of. I'm not an oddball that
I'm not the only one.
The only one. And to me, then I know that, also they're more open if I say, it's okay that you didn't get your homework done. Let's look at why. Not to like automatically go, what, and like be mad, but like,
if they think that every time they don't do their homework on time, they're going to get yelled at, then they're just going to hide it and try to not communicate at all. Kids mirror what their parents are doing. And I think what you are showing your kids is not necessarily to, like you said, admit that they're feeling the same emotion, but you're showing them the process that you went through of how to identify what you were feeling and why, and how to express it in a healthy way. And I think that subconsciously, even if a kid seems like it's kind of going over their head, I think kids pick up on a lot more than parents think that they do. Small, especially when you're really, really down and really, really low, very small, seemingly insignificant things can make a drastic difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, I've been in periods of time where I'm just so down. And sometimes I'll go for a walk to try to cheer myself up, and I'll call one of my parents. And sometimes they're both busy. And just having them not answer the phone or text me, say, I'm sorry, I'm in an appointment, I can't talk. Sometimes I just feel like I'm going to fall apart. I'm like, no, not one more thing. But if they answer, there's this just wave of relief. And I just know that I can talk to them and things will get better. Sometimes it's not my parents. Sometimes it's a friend or a doctor or a therapist or somebody that can just hear you out. I'm a big outward processor. Not everybody's like that, but just small things. Even talking to my mom for 10 minutes can sometimes just drastically change my mood, or a friend, right? Mm-hmm. It just pulls you out of that cycle that you get in where you just, one negative thought leads to another one, and you just spiral downwards because it's so easy to do that. And I think just hearing that somebody's there for you, that they care, giving somebody a hug or a smile, or, it can seem so pointless. You could think to yourself, there's no way that this could make a big difference. But I think a kid just knowing that they've got somebody that has their back and that truly loves them and cares about them, not because they are obligated, but because they genuinely care, is probably the most significant thing a parent can do.
Okay, mamas, I hope that gave you some insight on what it is like from the mouth of someone young to be able to tell us what it's like. Here's a resource for you. The COVID-19 State of Hawaii portal has information and help on living and working safely, including a crisis support hotline. Just text Aloha 741-741 or call 800-753-6879. And remember, you can always dial 211 for live assistance with anything you need in the state of Hawaii. Okay, well, that is our show for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you back here next week. For now, take care, stay safe, and be well. Aloha.